consistent weather. It has been hard to predict this weather, that is for sure. But that is going to be postponed to a later date. We met last week and kind of made some adjustments in the dates for VBS. Those are going to be now the 8th and the 10th the 8th through the 10th of June. I think that's a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Yes, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 8th, 9th, and 10th. If you have interest in helping in any way, or shape, or form, let any one of the members, Molly is heading it up, but let us know so we can get you involved. Remember to check the food pantry out front. It's loaded up, at least it was last week, so we've done a good job of making sure the community is provided for. The bulletin has some dates around Camp Concern, so check those out from college all the way to junior week. Some new prayer requests. We heard a number last week. I know Kara had mentioned Royce has been having some challenging health issues. One of Gwen's friends, Tammy, had a biopsy last week. It's always uncertain and anxious, I'm sure. We know Rob mentioned last week his uncle had passed away recently. Pam's sister, Nancy is her name, lost her fiance Aaron on Friday. Unfortunate circumstance, most certainly. Jane's friend Sue is having health issues. That's from last week, right? Sue Spickenberg, right? Is that right? Spickerman, sorry. That's right. Vinny sent her love and well wish to everyone. Keep her and Malcolm in your prayers. There's a number of loved ones, friends and family that continue to be on our prayer requests, prayer list, so remember to keep them in your prayers. If I could have, Keith, if you would mind leading a prayer this morning before we get started.
Father, we thank you. Thank you. Blessings on the process. Thank you for the family we have here. Blessing us.
Amen. We're going to be in Romans 13 this morning. Romans 13. So we hit in chapter 12 last week a number of we'll call them acts in love, and specifically, if I can say it, audiences that those acts are geared towards. Right? Anybody remember a couple of the audiences that we looked at last week in chapter 12 of Romans? Who were some of those acts geared towards, if you recall? What's that? God. What gives you that impression? What makes you? Yeah, if you read chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, it's pretty apparent that those acts are directed at God, right? Paul writes, I appeal to you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, right? It says it right there, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, be transformed by the renewal of your mind, testing may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable. Yes, Keith had a really good observation last week, too. We were talking about, I think it was about living sacrifice, and it was sort of contrary to what I was thinking and what we were talking about, but it was, do you remember? Probably. It was something. All I know is it was. That sounds about right. It was definitely. It was a different line of thinking that I had, which I appreciated. Mm-hmm. No, you don't. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Rich. I think we referenced chapter 6 of Romans, where it talks a lot about being buried with Christ through baptism, right? And becoming one together in that act. Yeah. All right. What other audiences do you remember were geared towards the acts that we read about in chapter 12 of Romans? So yes, towards God, the first two verses. What else? Or who else? The church. Okay, the brethren. Yeah, verses 3 really through, call it 8, right, where he talks about don't think of ourselves more highly than we ought to, right? No one's better, no one's worse. We're all level playing field. We have many members. We all serve different functions, right? Verse 4 and 5 and 6, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us use them. And he talks about prophecy, service, exhortation, contributing. Absolutely. What else? Who else? Well, there was one more group we talked about towards the end. It was the last part of chapter 12. Yeah, persecutors. Yeah. We didn't get a chance to hit on it a lot, but it's one of those that it's we know it. Jesus gives many examples. He lives that life, right, where he reaches out intentionally to those that are sinners that aren't necessarily following him in the moment, right? And many of those persecuted him and continue to persecute him. And Paul writes that we should continue to show them love and kindness, and how difficult that is. And specifically, chapter 12, last verse of chapter 12, 21. We'll back up to 20. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. Or by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That's incredibly difficult a lot of times in this world where it seems that we want to live by the old eye for an eye adage, right? You get what is yours, and don't let anybody take it from you. Paul reminds us that it's quite the contrary, right? Whose does he say is vengeance? The Lord, yeah, right? He says that many times in Romans. He specifies it in Romans chapter 1. He talks about the wrath of God, right, is coming. And he'll dig into that more in chapter 13. So let's turn the page to chapter 13 of Romans. So let me go ahead and I will headline this. I do not intend for this to turn into a political discussion, because it certainly could go that route. But if we end up, stepping in that realm a little bit, let's just all be respectful, and I'm sure we will. But chapter 13, let's start off by reading verses 1 through 7. If I could ask for someone to read chapter 13, verses 1 through 7 of Romans, and then we'll discuss it.
Every person action authority except God. Authority has opposed or rulers are not with authority. Minister of God to you. What is he for you? Of God. Not the. Therefore, it is rejection, wrath. This also devoting them to all what is acts, custom, to
A lot there. It's a lot there. So he's talking to who's the audience that we're gearing our love towards in this passage here? Yeah, authorities, the government, right? The state, however you want to phrase it, right? The people that, the organizations, the worldly organizations that God has put in place to maintain morality, maybe if we could say it like that, perhaps, law of order, possibly. So let's talk about context here for a second. I'll ask a pretty broad, open-ended question for you history buffs out there, which you probably know more about it than I do. Why does Paul, let's talk about the time in which Paul's writing this and why he feels the need to talk about this and call it out specifically. Does anybody know anything particularly about that time of the world? Specifically, he's writing to the church at Rome, right? The imperial city. There's a lot going on in Rome. Probably around, I think it was 50, 55 AD, I think is what we talked about approximately is when this was roughly written. What's happening in the world in Rome specifically around that time? Does anybody recall? It's okay if you're wrong. Come on.
Certainly turmoil.
Christianity was what? And it's it's been around a long time? Was it a new thing? What was it? It was pretty new, right? When something is new, I'll say different, what is the typical response from perhaps say it again, Carl? Why are they against it? Yes, I agree with you. It's different, right? Maybe contrary to what they've known. I mean, think about the population he's been writing to and talking to specifically in the book. For the majority of the book, he's been talking to the Jews who've grown up many generations on the law and educating themselves and being ingrained in the law. And Paul's here saying, well, while I appreciate your efforts and you're doing it with zeal, we need to change our thinking, right? But yes, this is a new religion, and there's going to be some backlash, right? There's going to be some disagreements. What else? Who had just come? Who was just there? Not long before Paul wrote this. Say it again. Yeah, Jesus was there. Was Jesus a feather ruffler, or was he a follower, if I could say it like that? And feather ruffler obviously is not the right way to put it, but you know what I'm saying. Jesus was bold, right? He was bold. He did not conform, right? Rub people the wrong way. Rub the Jews the wrong way. Rub the Pharisees the wrong way. They tried to back him in the corner a lot, right? To get him to say things that would support their effort and support their way of thinking in their life. He wasn't aggressive. That's right. I would agree with that. So, what do you think Paul's attitude towards the Roman government is right now? I mean, Paul's a Roman citizen, right? Based on what we've read so far and what you know about Paul in the book of Romans and other letters, what is your opinion of Paul's perspective towards the Roman government? Yeah, I would say it's generally positive. I don't think it's on any guardrail. I think it's generally positive. At least twice that we know of to escape death, probably, right? Is that what you're referencing? Yeah, in Acts 16 and then again in 25, the authorities were afraid of doing something and hurting him or killing him because he was a Roman citizen. Yeah. Now, he didn't necessarily ask for that to happen, but he knew that it was a benefit to him as a Roman citizen. Yeah. What else? Anything else that you're aware of regarding Paul and his perspective and feelings towards the Roman government? Generally, the government, the idea of government, the Roman government, just at that time was arguably was Rome's greatest contribution to Western civilization at that moment in time. And I think Paul recognizes that to a degree. But does he agree with it always? And do we have to agree with it always? He even says that. Right? There's wordage later on in the chapter that even says that specifically. But we do it out of what? Why do we submit and respect? That's right. That's right. Absolutely right. There's others. Many people reference, I believe it's pronounced Gallio, in Acts 18 as an early Christian that wasn't as fond of the Roman government, or perhaps the way they did things. In Acts 18, there's that the action of Gallio there is considered a very, I believe you say it, laissez-faire kind of approach and mentality versus Paul, more of a I say strict, perhaps more regimented, more structured approach. But there were those who just kind of had a little bit of a looser opinion and feeling. For you history buffs out here, again, it's kind of setting some context. So knowing that Christianity was a newer religion, a newer faith at that time, right? Where were they converted from? What were they prior to that? What was their faith of? I can say it like this. They were Jews, right? They were Jewish converts, a lot of them, right? And there was some resentment in Rome around that time. There would be revolts later. One of the leaders, his name was Claudius, had commanded an expulsion of Jews in the city of Rome. Many argue that Paul was aware of this, given some writings in Acts 18. And then I think it's mid-80s, 60s, something like that, there was a really well-known ruler that persecuted Christians very, I don't know the right way to say it. I don't want to say famously because that's not the right wordage, but there's Nero, right? We all familiar with Nero, right? I think somewhere in the mid-80s, 60s, he placed the blame. There was a great fire in Rome, and he had placed the blame on Christians on that act, and as a result, there were persecutions, very public and violent persecutions of Christians based on what Nero was claiming. So there's a lot of backstory there, a lot of context, not only for Paul, but the Roman government, right? And sort of where they were at in their stage of life. So if we kind of look at that first section again, 1 through 7, every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. If we don't remember anything else, remember that. Remember that. As much as we maybe disagree and personally, politically with certain things, the institutions are there because God put them there. And we're to respect that. We're to respect that. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed. And those who resist will incur judgment. I find verse 3 and 4 pretty powerful. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of the conscience. Any thoughts on that, the last part there? I love the language. It's probably translated differently, but verse 4, for he is the servant of God, an avenger. I'm a superhero nerd. I like fun. When you hear terms like that, it makes you just smile because you know those are the good guys, right? But that's a reference to, my Bible has a reference to 1 Thessalonians 4. And that's another letter by Paul, in 4:6 specifically. In 1 Thessalonians, I'll back up to verse 5. Not in the passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God, but that no one transgress and wrong his brother in this matter, because the Lord is an avenger in all things, as we told you beforehand and solemnly warned you. Why is Paul calling God an avenger? That's not flying around in an iron suit, right? Or with his, I'm making Marvel references for those who aren't aware. Only if Craig was up here, he would appreciate that. Why does Paul call God, called the Lord an avenger? What do we think? I'm gladly proven wrong. He says the Lord is an avenger also in 1 Thessalonians. So, I mean, either way, whether it's on behalf of or directly, what's he avenging? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yep. I don't disagree with that. What else? Yeah. Yep, I agree. Richard, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say that he's making
Yeah.
all wrongs.
Yeah. Just think it's, I don't know what your translation says. I'm reading ESV at the moment, but love the language Paul uses there. Very vivid. Mm. I appreciate those comments. Even though I said at the beginning I didn't want for this and didn't intend for this to turn into a political discussion, and then I don't intend that that's where we're going here. But this is, I mean, we can look at this today and have a pretty healthy discussion, right, on opposing political views, can we not? Some extremes, some radicals, some may call them. Whoever resists authorities resists what God has appointed and will incur judgment. We have people today that resist authorities and resist and vehemently disagree, maybe sometimes illegally, with what's happening in the world and with government. I'm not even talking about necessarily homeland, right? Obviously, that's pretty apparent, but all across the world this happens. Does it not? Doesn't make it better or worse, but Cassidy, I think those words you just stated, right? It's comforting. Again, one of those, it's a lot easier said than done. It's hard to do. You,
I'm just Russia telling you
Yeah. That's a fair point.
There's always times of hard times.
And even back in the time of the first century Christians, right? I mean, we read, I mean, Paul highlights it in 2 Corinthians 11, right? Where he talks about all the times that he was thrown in jail. Why was he thrown in jail? What maybe the government didn't want him to do, right? I agree with what you say, Bernie. I would tend to agree with that as well. This is a I don't know, I don't want to say gray area. That's not what I'm trying to say, but it's when you're studying and you're studying with folks maybe who don't know the word, it's a hard one. Possibly, right?
Say more, but maybe
Yeah.
most of that established by force, by birth, and about that. So where's the limit?
Mm.
You know, until I'm one of those rulers that has been duly elected, but is far can I go before I'm
Yeah.
I wonder sometimes further than
Intended? Yeah. Well, and Cass, I know you're going to say something, but real quick, because I'll lose my train of thought. What Bernie said to me, like the government, the state, these, if I can say, call them organizations, are set up and established by God, by God, right? So, in a sense, they report to God. When what those organizations or institutions do don't fall in line or don't coincide with the way God's instructions, what they have, I think that's when our moral compass, whatever you want to call it, right, needs to say, you know what, this doesn't smell right. And then I'm coming to you, Cass, so don't lose your train of thought. Yeah? Yeah? It's a great observation. Cass?
Mordecai. And Esther having to up to all the time what was right for her. Her being thrown in the lions. There are times, right? Disrespect of God is pretty not falling in line with God's word and isn't also
And to me, the thing I keep coming back to, and then we'll finish out chapter 13, I promise. So oftentimes, especially in leadership and politics, you know, the intentions are generally positive, especially early on, it would seem. But the longer someone perhaps stays in office or has that power, sometimes they feel it, right? But then you read verse 1 again of chapter 13. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. Again, if you take nothing away from class, take that away. Regardless of what any person, what any organization, what any body of this earth will tell you, all authority comes from God. Jesus says it multiple times, right? Did you want to say something?
I don't want to
Go, you come on.
get through it, but this weekend at the youth, Daniel on me. They never said, not my king. Whatever it was, said, king can't do asking. I think we can, our morals and values is still respect for the, if what God desires of us. Still, who's in God placed there, or resist whatever is of us fiery furnace. It. If anybody had to look him in hero, Jesus' time, very anti. They lived under that rule, and anybody, I think there's significance to Paul writing this. He can say it about the government at that time.
That's a good observation, yeah. We can say
I
it
almost
too.
think in some ways our voice that we do have in our detriment. Yeah, I didn't vote. Lose respect for authority.
Yeah.
Back to Nero, there. Paul can do it with Nero.
Great observation. Great observation. I'm going to hit on, well, let's read 6 and 7 again. So this is just wrapping up that authority section. Or because of this, because God has instituted these organizations, these bodies, you also pay taxes. For the authorities are ministers of God, attending for this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. We don't need to necessarily, we don't have time to dig into this a ton, but I do think a lot of this just speaks to what you just said. If that's what we have to do, whether we agree with it or not, we need to do it. And we need to be respectful in the way in which we do it, right? Look, nobody wants to pay taxes. I get it. But to a degree, it's a responsibility of being a citizen. They experience that too, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand to some degree with what we were just talking about. Mm. Mm-hmm. True. I mean, again, going back to the Daniel example, right? Or the Mordecai example, right? They just essentially said no, respectfully. Not going to do that. Not what my God expects of me, right? You talk about being bold, especially in the face of a fiery furnace, right? Or the lion, or getting beheaded on the gallows, right? That's boldness. That's boldness. All right, let's wrap by looking at the last part of chapter 13. Anybody can read 8 through the rest of the chapter, 14.
Will no man love one hath fulfilled. This thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not thou shalt love thy neighbor thyself. Love worketh no evil. Love therefore, and this is knowing that the Son already now his salvation us. First be night is far spent, as there off the work of darkness. Armor of let us walk becomingly, not his, not in fortune, not in strife and jealousy, but right and not provision.
Thanks, Dave. All right, the last part of chapter 13. Who are these acts directed towards? Or what are these acts directed towards?
I've read.
I think he's talking to all, right? Yeah.
I've read.
Yeah. I think he's obviously talking to a people, but I think he's talking to something more broadly. What is your opinion on what he's talking to act in love towards? My opinion, it's verse 10, the last part. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Thought here, just based on the study that I've done, is that the acts here towards the law. And he talks a lot about love. We hear a bunch, right, in this passage. He quotes much of the Ten Commandments, right, in verses 8 through 10. Why does he do that? Why does he bring up the Old Testament, or excuse me, the commandments again? Are they? Are they? Had Christ died at that time? Yeah. Now, Christianity, remember, Dave, was really new, right? So yeah, that was very popular. It was a heated discussion. So they were still in play for some people. Yeah, they were. And that could be a struggle. But why else do you think Paul brings this up again? Because this is not the first time he's referenced commandments. The Ten Commandments specifically that Moses got. Yeah, he says in, so he says, and he didn't quote all of them, right? You should not commit adultery, you should not murder, you should not steal, you should not covet. And then he says, and any other commandment are summed up in this word. Everything else will fall into place, right? Sorry, I thought I heard something else over here. Oh, yeah. I think he's just hitting a couple of those specifics, right? Bringing up a lot of what they already know. They know those things. They're very familiar with the old law, right? But look, you're going to do all those things. You have love. And that's a hard thing to grasp for a lot of these. I mean, it's a hard thing for us to grasp a lot of times, right? Because that's very abstract, right? Versus something concrete on stone, right? Physical, tangible, right? In verse 10, where it has that phrase, love is the fulfilling of the law, I have a cross-reference to John 14, verses 15 and beyond. If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever. Right? Who did?
Wife. Or
That's fair. I guess my point when I say it's concrete, the idea of being love on your heart is, in general, it's more abstract in its nature, right? But you can see that, you can tangibly be evidenced by it in those acts, right? In those things that you, in how you live your life, in how you talk to people, and what you don't do, and not stealing, not murdering, right? Not coveting. And then verse 11, and then we'll wrap at the end of the chapter. Besides this, you know the time, that the hour has come for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we first believed. The night is far gone, the day is at hand. So then let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us walk properly as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy. Put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify his desires. What's the message there in the last 3 or 4 verses? Okay. Why?
walking.
Okay. Yeah. Why? What is coming? What's happening? Why? Soon, right? It's at hand. What's he say? The night is far gone, the day is at hand. Salvation is nearer to us than when we first believed. We got to get going. We got to shape up. God's at work redeeming his creation. Paul's mentioned that a couple of times in Romans. Can't be partaking in the things that he lists, right? With you partaking in love. It's kind of contrary, right? The second half of this passage are the things you shouldn't be doing, but in the first half, it's a little bit of, hey, here's some of the examples of the things you should be doing, but doing them out of love, not because the tablets say that they're written on tablets and that's why you should do it, but you're doing it out of love, out of motivation, out of inspiration, because you believe that God is the true God and that Jesus died on the cross for our sins. And again, it's not a checking off the box law, it's a fulfillment of the law because you love the Lord, and doing what is asked is respecting his authority and walking in the light. We're 2 minutes over, but any additional thoughts or questions?
Real quick. I'm not saying. Certainly. I'm not sure that's says owe nothing to someone. Buddy. Oh, I owe you. But we have a loving relationship. You don't owe me anything
Right.
if I've done our loving relationship. We're gonna serve each other and provide each other's needs. No reason to have a how I take it. Very difficult, certainly.
That's a good observation.
Well, and it follows all the things you owe.
This is
So,
true.
to me, it's almost like you owe these things, all this respect and all. Make sure you're doing them because you don't owe anybody. You don't owe anyone. Paying your taxes, respecting all of the things.
Yeah.
Therefore, owe it.
And he's not quoting specifically, but there is a cross-reference there to Leviticus 19, right? 19:13 says, "You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning." Right? So and I have another cross-reference to Proverbs 3:27. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, "Go and come again tomorrow. I will give it," when you have it with you. Right? I think ultimately, I go back. What Keith said to me is, I believe that's essentially the gist of what that message is right there in verse 8. Right? Don't do anything that's going to infringe upon your ability to love somebody else. And do it now. Don't wait. Yeah, don't kick the can down the road. Like we just read, was it Proverbs? I think it was just then. Awesome. Thanks again for the discussion this morning. Great stuff.